Good evening.
Good evening, Rabbi.
Thank you. Yeah, we're going to the next chapter. So let's go there. Is Resh Mem Tet. Okay. Right. So now we're changing the subject, but something similar to this, which is that the Torah says, "En olchim berev Shabbat yoter migivul parsaot." You're not allowed to travel on Friday more than 3 parsah. So what does that mean? Whether you're driving or walking or whatever it may be, you shouldn't travel more than that distance. So what is parsa? Parsa means 4 mil, So we're talking about 72 minutes times 3. So how much is that? 3 hours and a half, approximately 3.5 hours. A little bit more, 6 minutes more. So you shouldn't travel that much, more than that. Let's see the tour inside. So what's the reason for this? The rabbi said not to do this. כדי שיגיע למלון בעוד יום גדול. In order that he should get to his right hotel, whatever you want to call it, right, wherever he's staying, his destination, we want him to be there, like well before Shabbat. Why is that? כדי ויכול להכין צורכי שבת, סעודה שבת, because you should be able to prepare the meals of Shabbat. He has to have time to prepare. So that requires, let's say, I don't know, 2, 3 hours to prepare. So you should give at least that much time, and that's the reason why we tell him not to go more than 3.5 hours. So it goes on. Doesn't matter whether he's going to his house or the or he's going to be hosted by somebody, right? Going as a guest somewhere. It's all the same, right? And kovin seuda. So okay, yeah, that's it. So let's go back to Beit Yosef. So it says Bet Yosef, En olchim be'erev Shabbat yoter migimel parsaot, as we said. So it says, explains, it gives a source for this, right? Beresh perek lulav be'arava. It's in the Masechet Sukkah, Mem Daled Amud Bet. And it says there like this, Amar Aibu, this is a rabbi, right? It says this rabbi, Mishum Rabbi Elazar Bar Tzadok, in the name of Rabbi Elazar Bar Tzadok. Lo yolech adam be'erev Shabbatot. So it says there, right? You shouldn't go on Erev Shabbat. Yoter megimel parsot, more than 3 parsah, as we said, right? Which we said was 3.5 hours approximately, a little bit more. Amar Rav Kana. So Rav Kana says, Lo maran ela lebete. That's only when he's going to his house. Aval lush bizeh. But if he's going to be hosted by somebody, right? Amain denakit. That which he used this language, samich ika deamre. Some say lo nitzcha ela afilu lebete. Some say this was only applying right to this only needed to be said regarding even to his house. So he says, with me there was actually a case like this. The afilu kaseh de harsana lo ashkeche. And they didn't even have simple, like, food, like fish, fried fish. They didn't have that. Katuv, Zeh Harif, and the Rif writes this, Ve'arosh, and the Rosh also. Beso Perek Kama de Shabbat, in the end of the first Perek of Shabbat, Umashma Kelishna Bata Naktinan. So it implies that we use the last language, the second language. V'chein Pasak Rambam, that's what Rambam Paskins also. Perek Lamed in the 30th chapter, right, of Shabbat. V'kachem Direh Avenu. So he said that's also the Torah's understanding as well. And Ireli, it seems to me, says, De'ainu keshehu b'makom yishuv. That's only if he's in a inhabited area. Sheuchal le'achin tzorech Shabbat. He can make the leads of Shabbat. Aval imu b'makom she'i efshar le'achin tzorech Shabbat. But if he's in a place where it's not possible, right, to prepare the needs of Shabbat, mutab she'avo lebeto, it's better to go to his house. Yachol ulai le'uchal le'achin tzorech Shabbat mi she'yishaer sham. So he says, because maybe this he'll have a better chance of preparing the needs of Shabbat rather than staying there. Shabbatai lo yuchal le'achin tzorchei Shabbat, because for sure he won't be able to prepare the needs of Shabbat. V'afal pi shehu olech litareach, even though he's going to be as a guest etzel achirim by other people, mutar mitam zeh, it's allowed because of this reasoning. V'afal pi shekatav Rambam, and even though the Rambam said shetam aisur keshemitareach etzel achirim, the reason of the prohibition when he stays with other people, who mipnei shemevayishan, it's because he embarrasses them, mipnei shelo echinu davar arawi leorchim, because they didn't make anything worthy for the guests. Kivan shehu b'makom shelo yuchal leachin tzorchei Shabbat. Since he's in a place where he's not able to prepare the needs of Shabbat, en lachush lechach. So we're not really concerned about that, he says. Afilu im yesh imo tzeda, that's tzorchei Shabbat. And even if they have enough, right, provisions for Shabbat, im eno omed b'Shabbat b'makom yishuv, but if he's not in a place where there's some habitation there going on, batuach mutar lelech kama parsaot. So then he can go even several parsaot, b'makom yishuv bainan, because we want to be in a place, or an inhabited place. Deilu omed b'derech eno makom batuach, because if he's standing on the road somewhere, right, it's not safe there. Why? Because the roads are assumed to be dangerous. Okay, good. Let's move on. כתב רבנו ירוחם, says this rabbi, ונראה כי הכל לפי העניין. So he says it seems like everything is according to the context. Sheim shalach hashaliach lefanav, because if he sent like somebody in front of him, or tziva kodem beneveto, or he told his household lachino to prepare for Shabbat, and ze mina klal. So then it's not really a problem because it's going to be somebody's going to do it there. V'chen nireh midivrei Rambam. It seems in the Rambam the same thing. Shekatav sharei en bnei beto yodim shayom yavo. So he says, because the people don't know that he's coming today, this person, right? He's coming home. In order to prepare for him. So the meaning what? That we see from here that if somebody's preparing for him right there in that place, in his destination, so he doesn't have to really worry. He can travel, not really a problem. It's only when there's nobody preparing, so he's gonna have to do it himself when he gets there. Okay, great. So this was Bet Yosef, Aleph. So let's do Shulchan Aruch. So it says here, not this one. This one. Okay, so it says in Shulchan Aruch, "En holchim be'erev Shabbat yoter megim parsah." Right? We don't go on erev Shabbat more than 3 parsah, 3.5 hours. Kadesh yagia lebeto. So that means that a person shouldn't really take a flight, or a long flight like that on Friday, or to drive more than that time, because this would be included in that category, obviously. So as we said, what's the reason for that? In order you should get home, right? And there's still time to prepare for Shabbat. So he says you can make the needs for the Seudah on Shabbat. Whether he's going to somebody else's house or his own house. That's only if he's in the inhabited area. מקום שיוכל להכין צורך השבת, where you can make Shabbat. אבל אם מקום שהוא שם, אי אפשר לא להכין צורך השבת. But if it's the place where he is, he cannot do the needs of Shabbat there. או שאינו מקום יישוב בטוח, or it's not safe place there. מותר ללך אפילו בכמה פרסות. So then we allow you to travel even longer. Because, the place you're in right now is not stable, it's not safe. So, it's not suitable for the purpose here. ואם שלח להודיעם שהוא הולך שם לשבת. So it says, if he's sent there to notify them that he's going there for Shabbat. So meaning what? He called them up, he sent them an email, whatever, right? So then they know he's coming. So that's fine, if they know he's coming, they'll prepare. So, he's fine, he can travel longer. So there are ways to get around this problem, right? If a person knows how to do it properly, he has the proper conditions, he can do it. מותר ללכת כמה פרסאות בכל גמלה. You can go anywhere, right? Long distance. Okay, that's it. Very good. So that was Aleph. Let's move on. Bet. Right, so it says like this. And in Seudat Be'erev Shabbat. We don't make a Seudah for Erev Shabbat. Mishum Kavod Shabbat. Because, the honor of Shabbat. So meaning what? That if you eat a meal before Shabbat, you won't be hungry for Shabbat. So therefore they told you, right? Don't make a big meal, right, close to Shabbat. Otherwise you're not going to be hungry for Shabbat. You won't have any appetite. מותר לאכול עד שתחשך. But he says, on the other hand, you're allowed to eat until it gets dark. So what does that mean? You can eat, but don't make a big seudah, because otherwise, you won't be hungry. But to have a little snack is okay. כל מקום אסור לקבוע בו סעודה כדי שייכנס לשבת כשהוא תאב. לאכול, לשון רמב"ם, this is what the Rambam says. מצווה שימנע אדם מן המנחה ולמעלה ולקבוע סעודתו. So the Rambam says, this prohibition, when does it start? From the time of mincha and onwards, on Erev Shabbat. When you read דאף קודם המנחה נמי אין כקבוע דערב. So he says, really the truth is that even before mincha he says, you shouldn't do it. דערב שבת סתמה כמר, because he's talking about Erev Shabbat in general, in the Talmud. דגרסינן בפרק השולח, because it says in this perek, אמר רבי חייא בר אבא, this rabbi said, אמר רבי יוחנן, ג' משפחות היו, look what it says, right? Very, very scary story. There was 3 families, היו בירושלים, אחד קבע סעודתה בערב שבת, one would make a סעודה on ערב שבת, ואחד בשבת, and one would do it on שבת. פירוש בשעת בית המדרש, right? They would do it at the time where they were teaching Torah. ושתיהן נעקרו, both these families were uprooted. ויראה שדרך אנשי המעשה להתענות כל היום. Okay, that's already something else. So let's go back to Bet Yosef. So says Bet Yosef, אף אגב דקיימלן, דבערב שבת מותר לאכול עד הלילה. Even though we hold, right, according to halacha, that you're allowed to eat until the night, Erev Shabbat. Rabbi Yosef, like Rabbi Yosef, they amar בפרק הרבה פסחים, like I said, it's in this Gemara, פסחים צדיק ט עמוד ב', אוכל והולך עד שתחשך, he can eat all the way until it gets dark. כלומר, מתחיל לאכול עד שתחשך. So that means to say that he can start to eat, right, until it gets dark. וכן פירש ר"ן, that's what it says in the Ran also, שם, דברי הריף, the words of the Rif. וכן כתב הראש, also the Rosh writes like this, בשם הרמב"ן. Name of the Ramban. שכך הוא דת הריף. This is the opinion of the Rif. וכן הסכים הראש, also the Rosh agrees that. but דלא כבהג, not like בהג, שכתב, דאפילו רבי יוסף, Because he wrote that even Rabbi Yosef modeh betet shaot umala asur liyatchil. That even he holds that after 9.5 hours you're not allowed to start a meal already. Mefaresh Rabbeinu dehane mile achila be'alma. So he says Rabbeinu explains, right, the tour that's talking about just regular eating, just snacks, whatever, snacking, nashing, whatever you want to call it. Aval kaviyut seuda sheno regil ba. But he says when it comes to making a really seuda, right, something big, which is not usually done on weekdays, right? Asur kolayam, that's forbidden all day. Me'ahid de sholech de besamuch, from this Gemara that we mentioned. Okay. Lashon Rambam. So he says the Rambam right says that Shevi Rabbeinu Perek Lamed that the Tur brought in the 30th chapter. Even though the Rambam says in different style over there, language, and the Tur argued with that. Like we have this right text in the Gemara. If he made the Seudah Berev Shabbat on Erev Shabbat, Midukamar Berev Shabbat Tama, since he just said, right, Erev Shabbat, that implies the whole day. Mashma, the Kol Hayom Nami Asur. It's forbidden the whole day. Not only later on in the afternoon. Katav Gom Mari Avuhab. So says this rabbi, Bezel Hashem, V'echal B'Shabbat Perush B'Shat Bet HaMidrash. So he says, what does it mean, Echad B'Shabbat, Sunday? Talking about the time of the Bet HaMidrash. So what does that mean? That when they were supposed to be studying Torah on Shabbat, instead they made the Seudah at that time, which is very disrespectful to the Torah. Zeh perush hu milashon. So he says this is the language of the Gemara. Shomer be'echad b'Shabbat beidan be'midrasha. That he's saying, right, that it was at the time of the studying, right, of the Torah. Ve'ulai ha'mechaber mevi rayash sherev Shabbat hu stama. Says maybe the author brings here proof that Erev Shabbat is it's a regular meaning of it. Rashon Gemara, like the language of the Gemara. Shamar be'erev Shabbat u'b'Shabbat, because it says over there Erev Shabbat and Shabbat. U'b'Shabbat perush piresh b'shat bet midrash. So it says the Erev Shabbat. What does it mean on Shabbat? That means at the time they were studying Torah, the Bet Midrash and the study hall. U'be'erev Shabbat lo piresh klal. And when it comes to Erev Shabbat, he didn't explain, right, the hours, whatever. Nireh shehu sama. So therefore, it seems like it's like all day. Ad kanashon, that's the end of it. Okay. Let's move on. So it says, even though in the Gemara they didn't really come to explain the high Shabbat Beidan B'Midrasha, that Shabbat is talking about when they were studying Torah. Ela Mimela, rather, right, we have to say that Mashma implies that the Hachi Ita B'Gemara. That's the way it's in the Gemara. That's the way that it's implied, because that's the way it is in the Gemara. Rabba behane telat mile ba'ale batim nachat minichsayu. So regarding this, right, Rabbi said, in these three manners, people, they lose their sustenance, their parnasa, because of this. Because they do these disrespectful things. The Kabae Seudatayu Baidan Bemidrasha. So it says, when it says, right, that they did the Seudah when they were studying Torah. Regarding that, Rabbi Yochanan said there was two families in Yerushalayim. Echad kava seudata b'Shabbat. One made the Seudah on Shabbat. Echad kava seudata b'Erev Shabbat, and one made on Erev Shabbat. Ushteen nekaru, and both families were uprooted. Makom daik Rabbeinu de Micharl shemitoch divrei Rabba. But he says, nevertheless, the Rabbeinu, the Tur, right, deduces here that since from the words of Rabbi, we learned the Isur Zeh Shekavah, that this prohibition that he made Seudata b'Shabbat, and he didn't make the Seudah Shabbat. Hanu Davka Beidan Be Midrasha. It's talking about when they were studying at that time. That's why. Okay. Ve'imita de Isur Zo Shekavah Seudata be'erev Shabbat. If it's true, he says, right, that this prohibition that they made on Erev Shabbat, Kol Hayom, it's all day, Habalei Leba'al Gemara Leparushe. In the Gemara, they should have defined that. Ve'af al pi she'en kedai le'achriya mikol makom. So it says, even though it's not proper to, right, to make this decision, like to render the verdict over here. Mikol makom sover mari avuhav. But he says, nevertheless, right. So what he means to say is that it's not enough, this proof is not enough to make that, right, the calculation. But he says, nevertheless, Mari Avuhav holds that this is what he was trying to reveal, right? This was his intention, though. Even though it's not said explicitly. So you should know that the Rambam, that's what he says. So he says there that if you want to make a seudah, right, or some kind of a banquet on Erev Shabbat, because of the because of the honor of Shabbat. So meanwhile, it's forbidden to do so because of the honor of Shabbat. Asur. But it's allowed. You're allowed to eat though until it gets dark. We're not talking about that. We're talking about making a seudah, heavy meal. So what I do, sometimes, you're getting ready for Shabbat, and you get a little bit hungry, like towards the afternoon, like towards the evening, but you can't really have a meal. It's too late now. It's close to Shabbat. So what do? You have a snack, like have some fruit, or something. Have a candy bar, or I don't know, whatever, right? Drink some coffee, whatever, to wake you up a little bit. So this way, right, you can eat and drink something, but don't make a full meal, because otherwise you won't be hungry for Shabbat. That's what he's trying to tell you. That's what I do, I just have a little snack, something. It holds me over, but I'm not full. Let's move on. So he says, but he says, nevertheless, right, even though you are allowed to eat until the evening, but the honor of Shabbat is that you should refrain, right, from mincha umala, from time of mincha and onwards, to make a seudah, like we said, right? Shabbat. They should go into Shabbat that he's hungry, right? He's hungry to eat something. Says Rav Magid, so he says that if you're doing a seudah, which is not usually done on weekdays, right? Something big. Asur לעשותו בערב Shabbat. You're not allowed to do it בערב Shabbat. וכל היום בכלל האיסור, right? And the whole day, right, is included in this prohibition. ולאכול ולשתות בלי קביעות סעודה, אפילו סעודת רגיל בה. So it says, if you eat and drink without making a seudah, even something which you're regular to do, bechol on the weekdays, Kol hayom mutar, you're allowed to do that all day. להתחיל כרבי יוסי, like Rabbi Yosef, you're allowed to start the being meal. בפרק ערבי פסחים, like it says in ערבי פסחים, ולקבוע סעודה שנהוג בה בחול. And to make a seudah which is made on weekdays, nothing too big, nothing too fancy. Mitzvah limana mitet shaot umala, but he says nevertheless it's a mitzvah to refrain from 9 hours and onward, right? Not to eat, this kind of a meal, right? Any meal. Because he holds that even though we hold like Rabbi Yosef that you're allowed to eat until the evening, that's only if you don't make a seudah. You can snack, as we said, right? Snacking is okay, but don't make a seudah. Okay, good. We got a little bit more go. Let's finish it off, Billy Nada. So it goes like this. ורבנו שסתם דבריו ולא חלק בין קביעות סעודה לרגיל בה, לשנו רגיל נראה. So he says, why did then, if that's the case, right, why did the Torah, he didn't bother, to differentiate between a big meal and a regular meal, like we differentiated here. Why didn't he do that? So he says, שהיה מפרש דברי הרמב"ם דלא שני לה, because he seems to explain the words of Rambam a little differently, right? That he doesn't really differentiate ben seudah shagil she'eno ragil, whether it's a seudah which he's accustomed to do a big one or not a big one. It doesn't really matter. This is what he means to say. Asur likvoa seudah umishteh, that you're not allowed to make a meal, or a banquet. Pesh she'en isur zeh din. Says this prohibition is not from the din. In other words, it's not really, forbidden altogether. It's just like something proper, The Medina, because according to the din, kol hayom mutar le'echol, you're allowed to eat all day. As we said, klomar afilu b'kviut seudah, even with fixing the seudah. Uperesh od, he explains furthermore, she'en isur kviut seudah, that the prohibition of making a seudah is when ela dafka mina mincha mala, only when it's mincha time and onward. Pirush Rav Magid, so Rav Magid says, Nireh be'enai, he says, Perush, this Perush, he says, it seems right to me. Shemitoch divrei Rav Magid tavin, says, because from the words of Rav Magid, you're going to understand, shemincha amura kan mitet sha'ot umala, that this mincha, which we're talking about here, is talking about 9 hours and a half, right, from there and onward. Not 6.5, right? If you remember, we already mentioned before that there's a difference, right? Times of mincha, there's 2 different times. There's the earlier one, which is called mincha gdola, and there's the other later one, which is called mincha ktana. So here we're talking about the later one. That's what he's saying. Aval Rabbi katab, the mechitzot ulmala asur likva seudah. But the Rabbi says not like that. He says no. From midday and onward, it's already not allowed to make a seudah. So he says there is support for the words of Rav Magid. Perek Arve Psachim, right? In this Perek, Arve Psachim Samuch lemincha lo yochal. So it says right there that in the Gemara that when it's Erev Pesach, right, close to mincha time, shouldn't eat Adam at shetecheshach. He shouldn't eat until it gets dark. The Gemara Kuf Zayin Amud Bet, that's where it is. This Gemara, Samuch lemincha ktana, right, close to mincha ktana, which is, as we said, right, is the later time. Kamar is talking about that. Alma de behachi sagi likanes ta'ev leseudat dalayla. So he says, therefore, you see from there that in such a manner, right, it's enough to come in already. From that, in other words, from that time onward, as long as you don't eat, from that time onward, you're good. You'll be hungry, so you'll be fine. Umiu chatzi shah kodem zman mincha tana, but he says 1/2 hour before, right? The earlier time, bainan. That's what we really require. He says, kimo be'erev pesach, like erev pesach. Mishum achi. So he says, because of this, shavke hanemile lelishna Rambam. I got my maniot. Right, so he says that's why this rabbi deserted, abandoned, right, the words of the Rambam, the katana minchat katav mintet ushala. So because he didn't, instead of writing mincha like the Rambam says, which is ambiguous, he said no, 9.5 hours, right, which is the later time. The mina mincha katana echatzi sha'a. So it's because when it says that after mincha, it means a half hour, samuch la kamar. He's talking about a half hour close to it. Katav Sham Ramagid. Says Ramagid over there, B'Shem Farshim, the name of the commentaries. She'afag pi shemutar lechol ad shetechashach, as we already said, right? Even though it's allowed to eat until it gets dark, afilu le'atchil nami, right? Even to start eating, hanemile letzorich shah. That's only like something temporary. But lasot ken tamid, but to do this like every time, consistently. No, not allowed. The Mexican is alzel b'chvot Shabbat because it looks like he's right, denigrating the Shabbat, denigrating the honor of Shabbat. Okay, great. So that's the Beit Yosef. Very good. I think there's a little bit more here. Another piece. Let's see if we can find that. ועשינו בירושלים פרק משלים. Right. So it says in Yerushalmi in Betzah, Asur le'ares isha l'erev Shabbat. Right. Another thing, which is that you're not allowed to betroth a woman, right, erev Shabbat, on Friday. Hadad tema shelo la'asot seudat erusin. So it says that's talking about making a seudah. Ha le'ares yares. But if he wants to just give her the ring, and betroth her, that he can do. Just don't make the seudah. So he says, Davar Pashutu, it's really, obvious. Asar ela la'asot seudat erusin lis'ot be'erev Shabbat. That he only forbade in the case where he makes the seudah of the betrothal on erev Shabbat. Aval le'achino be'erev Shabbat. If it's just prepared on erev Shabbat, the Shabbat for Shabbat shara, that's allowed. That's the custom, he says. Okay, great. So that's the end of this. Beautiful. Okay, let's go to Shulchan Aruch. Gotta bring it up probably because it's a new chapter. No, we already brought it up. Okay, we brought it up, right? So let's see. So it says over here, Asur likvoa be'erev Shabbat seudat mishteh. You're not allowed to make, right, erev Shabbat, a seudah or a banquet, sheno ragil b'nei, which is not customary on the weekdays. So meaning what? To make a big meal, festive meal. Afilu hi seudat erusin, even if it's, as we said, right, to betroth the woman. Shabbat. Why? Because the honor of Shabbat. That's the reason why. Shikanes Shabbat shkeshut ta'ev lechol. They should go into Shabbat when he's right. He has a desire to eat. He's got to be hungry. So he says, all day this is forbidden to do, to make a big meal like that. So comes the Ramah here and tells you something important, right? It says the Ramah, the seudah shizmana be'erev Shabbat. What about if the proper time is on Friday, right, for this seudah? What's an example of that? can go on Brit Milah, right? For instance, Brit Milah, right? So what are you gonna do? That's the day. If that's the day that you're doing Brit Milah, so you got to do the Seudah that day. Or redemption of the firstborn. Mutar, those you're allowed to do, even though they're festive meals. Why is that? Because that's the proper time, What can you do, right? That's the way it came out. Destiny. Mutar, so that you're allowed to do stuff like that, right? That's something else. Ken really, that's the way it seems to me, and that's the custom, right? To be lenient with that. That's what we did this year also, if you remember, right? That Purim fell on Erev Shabbat. So we had to make a Seudah Purim on Erev Shabbat. What can we do, right? That's the time for it. What are you gonna do? Do it later? You can't do it later. So what we try to do, is to make it in the morning. This way, you'll be hungry for Shabbat. Because you make it if you make it in the afternoon, right? You won't be hungry. You're gonna have a problem. So proper thing to do is to make it in the morning. 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Then you'll be hungry for Shabbat. Okay, great. So that's the Ramah. What else we got? Continues the Shulchan Aruch. But he says when it comes to just eating, without any seudah, just snacking, even if it's something which he usually does on weekdays, you're allowed to do that all day. So what does that mean? You snack, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, right? Like this. Have a little, right, couple of cookies maybe. I don't know, whatever, right? Not too much. Or some other stuff, right? Fruits, vegetables, a little this, a little that. That's how you get by. This way you'll be hungry for Shabbat because you didn't eat anything heavy. So it'll be all right. That's the story. But he says, nevertheless, aval mitzvah leimana milikvoa seudat shenishnagu ba b'chol. But he says it's a mitzvah, not to make like a seudah, even something you have on weekdays. So in other words, the bottom line is like this, right? You, if it's a big meal, festive meal, you shouldn't eat it all day, unless it's right. That's the proper time for it. There's no choice. That's one thing. Then we say that if it's like a regular meal, weekday style, let's say you just have some like bagels and cream cheese, that's not a big meal, right? One bagel with cream cheese, it's a normal meal, something, nothing too big. Or, a slice of pizza, whatever, right? Something like that. So that you can really have, but, right, it's a mitzvah to refrain from that too. So meaning what? It's a mitzvah not to have any meal, even a small meal. Just, have some snacks, right? That's it, right? A little fruit, a little candy bar, something to hold you over until, Shabbat comes in. This is the proper way to do it if you're really hungry and weak. So when does the time of that prohibition start? For 9.5 hours and onward, right? So what does that mean? It's 2.5 hours before sunset. That's when we say you shouldn't do it. It's a mitzvah to refrain. Why? Because if you eat at that time later than that, you won't be hungry for Shabbat. If you're gonna have even if you have a little meal, you won't be hungry. Like let's say a person eats like 5 o'clock in the afternoon, right? Let's say he has a bagel with cream cheese, right? 5 o'clock. So he's not going to be hungry when Shabbat comes in, unless it comes in very late, like in the summer. But if it comes in, let's say it's 7, and he ate at 5, he won't be hungry for Shabbat. You know, he's going to have to wait a couple of hours to be hungry. So therefore, it's a mitzvah to refrain from that. But to have a little snack is okay, right? That's okay. Okay, what else we got here? Okay, I think we're good. So this is an important halakha. Very practical. Okay. So maybe we can do one more. Let's see. It's a short one. Yeah, this is very well known. I was just going to say this, but I figured I'd wait until right, we see it in the book. I was going to mention it. So it says here in the Torah, right? But it says, the pious people, right? What they do is they fast on Friday, they don't eat at all. Why? Because they want to be really hungry for Shabbat. They want to eat on Shabbat, with real pleasure, right? With real, intensity. Intense. So yeah. So therefore what they do is they fast all day. So today, not a lot of people do this, but because we're not very strong. But there is a custom like this amongst some people. They say that Baba Sali, he would fast all week, only eat on Shabbat. So there you go. There are some people like this. Perush, so Bit Yosef explains, Perush Kadeshi Kansul Shabbat B'Kishim Tevim. As we said, right? That they're going in the Shabbat when they're hungry. So he says, but the proof that he brought for this is not really enough. So he says, really, he should have brought his proof from somewhere else. Like it says in Yerushalmi, Perek Bet Taniot. Rabbi Avon Siem Kol Arova the Shabbat, right? So it says there that this rabbi, used to fast all Friday, right? All Erev Shabbat. Okay, there you go. It's very simple. So we have one more after this one. Let's see if we'll have time. We'll see what we can do. Says Shulchan Aruch, Derech Anshe Maaseh Lit'anot Bechol Erev Shabbat, right? As we said, the pious people, what they do is they fast on Friday, Erev Shabbat. As we said, what's the reason why? In order to come in very hungry. So then they really enjoy eating. Great. Let's go Dalit. This is the last one. So it says like this. Bayan asikna hilchata mitana mashlim perush im yirtzeh. Right. So here there's it's interesting discussion. It's talking about this, right? If you're going to fast on Erev Shabbat, the problem is, you're going into Shabbat fasting. And the question is, right, is that allowed? That you won't be able to eat, until you get home from synagogue. And all that time you're fasting because you haven't eaten all day. So is that allowed to come into Shabbat fasting? This is the question. Because the truth is, right, in general, you're not allowed to fast on Shabbat. So the conclusion of the tour over there is that if he really wants to do it, he could, to fast all the way until Shabbat comes in. But on the other hand, Tosfot says that you're not obligated to finish it like that. It's just if you want to. Also this rabbi, right? Also the Rosh. That's what it says also in Chagat Maimoniot. Perek Aleph Milchot Tanit, right? In this laws of fasting. Not like Ravia, these rabbis wrote that they said no, you have to finish it. It's not optional. You got to do it. Rav Magid Katav Perek B'Shem Ravad. So Rav Magid says, name of the Ravad, Shelo Amru Meshalim Ela Shenom Ochel Kodem Shkiat HaChama. So he says, when they said, right, you can finish it, that means that he won't eat before sunset. But he says, once sunset comes in, right, Mitosefet Shabbat, which is the addition of Shabbat, who Kidesh Hayom, and it's already like Shabbat, pretty much, right? Im Ratzah le'achol yochel. If he wants to eat, he can eat at that time. Right, even though it's not dark yet. It's not night yet. Shekivan shenichnas letchum Shabbat, because once he comes into the border, right, of the Shabbat, eno rashai litanol, he's not allowed to fast anymore at that time. Okay, interesting. Let's see the end of it. That was what Rabbeinu said, the tour. Since he's able to finish it if he wants, so therefore he would have to finish it until the stars come out. Right? Unless he explained, right? He proclaimed before, at the time that he accepted the fast, that he won't go that long. Right? Hem Divrei Rosh. That comes from the Rosh, he says, Bet Yosef. Beso Perek Bet Taniot, in this Gemara, Tanit. The Rosh over there. Okay, fine. What else we got? So then he says, right, whatever, Mash Katav Rabbeinu B'Shem Aram, that which the Tur said, name of the Ram, Katuah Mordechai Perek B'chol Me'arvim. The Mordechai also writes this, V'chen V'zeh Lashon Katav Rabbi Meir. This language, he says, Rabbi Meir said, the Ashlamat Tanit Be'erev Shabbat, that when you finish it, right, Erev Shabbat, your fast, Sagi ad dachar tifilat Arvit. It's good enough to go until the end of Arvit. Shemiplaga Mincha, which is on Plaga Mincha, which is early. Right, that's before sunset. Ve'elach, and onward, V'chen katav v'agot, and that's what it says in the Agot, Perek Aleph Minchot Tanit, first perek of the laws of fasting. Shafilu lidrei Omrim, that even according to one who said, Shetzarich le'ashlim, hainu, shemit'aneh adam, you have to finish. That it's only if he fasts until Achar Kibul Shabbat, until he takes on Shabbat. Utfilat Shabbat he and Miplaga Mincha or Mala, and they pray Shabbat, right, for Shabbat, the Arvit of Shabbat from Plaga Mincha, right, which is before sunset and onwards. Afilu im od ayom gadol. It says even if it's still daytime, Mikre Shapira Shlama. It's still consider that you finished the fast because it's already Shabbat. You took it on already. Aval en ken divrei Rosh, but that's not the way the Rosh says. Besov perek gimel bet Taniot, in the end of the Taniot, the second perek. Kemo shnit baer b'samuch, like we're going to explain later on. Katav, that was already explained. Katav od Mordechai, right? It says Mordechai furthermore. Pam echad ira asarat tevet. So he says one time the 10th of Tevet, which is a fast day, occurred on Yom Shishi, happened on Friday. This happens once in a while, right? Once every 5 years or so, right? This happens. Yom Shishi. So he says when the Ri wanted to go right to the synagogue, Tam Tafshil he tasted a little food, before he went to shul. He shouldn't go into Shabbat that he's fasting during Shabbat. But Temai says it's a wonder how he did that. But here he said, right, he finishes the fast. So we can answer like this, right, that they asked the question, what is the rule, regarding finishing the fast? So we concluded that he does finish it כלומר, יכול הוא להשלים, if he wants, he can finish it. אם ירצה, ומי הוא, טוב שלא להשלים, but it says it's better not to do it though. Good not to do it. שלא ייכנס בשבת כשהוא מעונה, because he shouldn't go into Shabbat when he is fasting. ואם באו לציבור מבית הכנסת עוד יום, so it says if the community came out of the shul, right, before it got dark, before sunset, מותר לאכול מיד, you're allowed to eat right away, דכיוון דכבר תפללו, because since they already prayed, אם כן כבר קיבלו שבת עליהם, that means they already accepted Shabbat on them. Great, that's great to know. Okay. Okay, a little bit more. Okay, I guess we'll finish it next time, B'ezrat Hashem. So it's already 9:30. So thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and happiness. Chazak u'baruch. Laila tov, and we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
God bless.